I thought that summer would be quiet, just me, an empty house, and the ocean. But everything changed the day he came back. The boy I used to know was now a man, and with him came every memory I thought I'd buried. What happened next was something I never expected, and something I'll never forget. The house hadn't changed. The same chipped white fence bordered the yard. The same porch swing creaked gently in the wind, and the same scent of salt and pine clung to the air like it always had during the summer months. Noah Grant stepped out of his car and looked around with a strange mix of familiarity and detachment. It had been years since he last stood here, yet the place welcomed him as if no time had passed. He was 24 now, older, quieter. He had come to this coastal town, not for memories, but for solitude. The house belonged to his father, who had taken a temporary assignment overseas and offered Noah the space for the summer while he finished his thesis. It was supposed to be a retreat, quiet mornings, long writing sessions, evening walks along the shore. Nothing more. But on his second day there, that plan unraveled. It happened casually, almost absurdly so. He had gone out to the market to pick up groceries and was standing in line when a familiar voice called his name. He turned, and there he was, Derek Stone. Derek had barely changed, still tall, still with that effortless calm in his posture, his hair a little shorter now, but the same. Noah felt something inside him tighten. He hadn't seen Derek since they were 17, since the summer that had gone strangely quiet between them, since the day Noah left town without saying goodbye. The reunion wasn't dramatic, just a hello, a handshake that lingered too long, a smile that didn't quite hide the tension. Derek asked what brought him back. Noah told him. Derek nodded and said, "We should catch up sometime." And that was it. But it wasn't. The moment lingered in Noah's chest for hours afterward like a ripple across still water. They saw each other again 2 days later, this time on the beach. Derek was running along the shoreline, earbuds in, sweat glistening on his arms. He waved when he spotted Noah. This time, they talked longer about nothing and everything. Old times, where life had taken them. Neither brought up the distance that had stretched between them, but it hung there in the silence between topics. Noah hadn't come looking for reconnections. Yet something about being around Derek again unsettled him. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was the way his chest ached in his presence. The way his mind replayed certain moments from their youth with more clarity than he expected. Memories of late nights swimming, secret laughter in the woods, the way their shoulders used to brush and neither pulled away. Back then, it had been easy to call it friendship. Now he wasn't so sure. He found himself watching Derek more than he meant to. The way he moved, the way he laughed without hesitation. Derek had always been the bolder one. Back then, Noah had admired him. Maybe more than that. But he never said it. Not when it mattered. One evening, Derek stopped by with a six-pack of beer and no explanation. They sat on the porch swing, the sound of the ocean just barely audible beneath the distant hum of cicadas. They talked until the sky turned indigo and the stars blinked to life. There was nothing unusual about it, at least on the surface. But the pauses between their sentences felt heavier than they used to. The way Derek looked at him when Noah wasn't speaking, as if searching for something, made his skin warm. Noah told himself it was just old emotions resurfacing, misplaced feelings from a different time. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. He could feel something growing between them, something too vague to name, but too real to ignore. The next morning, Noah woke earlier than usual. The house was quiet. Sunlight leaked in through the blinds, and the air felt heavy with humidity. He sat at the kitchen table, hand around a warm mug of coffee, eyes unfocused. His mind wandered, not to his thesis, not to work, but to Derek, the sound of his voice, the shape of his silhouette against the evening sky. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not again. Not now. But feelings rarely asked for permission. By the end of the week, they had settled into a quiet rhythm. Derek would show up unannounced, and Noah wouldn't ask why. They'd go for walks, sit on the porch, sometimes say nothing at all. And in that silence, the past kept knocking. There was one moment, brief, almost forgettable, when Derek brushed against Noah's arm while reaching for his drink. Their eyes met for just a second. Neither said a word. But something passed between them in that instant, unspoken and unshakable. And Noah knew this summer wasn't going to be about writing. It was going to be about remembering and possibly reliving everything he thought he'd buried. The days unfolded slowly, like pages from a book too delicate to turn quickly. Noah found himself adjusting to the strange rhythm of coastal summer life. The quiet mornings, the salt-heavy air, the distant sound of seagulls echoing through the windows. But more than that, he adjusted to the presence of Derek, who had somehow become a near-daily fixture in his world again. They didn't make plans. Derek simply appeared, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing but that familiar smile. And no one never questioned it. They drifted through the town together, down cracked sidewalks, through pine-shaded paths, past the old harbor where rusted boats still bobbed like tired memories. They spoke, but rarely of substance. Just easy, surface-level things. Updates about old classmates, casual jokes, observations about the weather. The real conversations remained unsaid, buried under layers of silence neither dared peel back. And yet, the silence said plenty. There were moments, fleeting but undeniable, when Noah felt something shift. A glance held for too long, a smile that carried weight, a pause between words that trembled with what wasn't being spoken. Each time, he told himself he imagined it, that he was reading too much into things. But each time, that explanation rang more hollow than before. He remembered how years ago they used to sit by the lake with their feet in the water, tossing stones and dreaming about faraway futures. Back then, he hadn't had the vocabulary for what he felt. He only knew that his chest tightened when Derek laughed, and that being near him felt like a secret too big to share. And now, sitting beside him once again, those same feelings stirred like dust in sunlight. One evening, after a long walk that ended at a secluded overlook above the ocean, they sat in silence, watching the horizon melt into gold. Derek leaned back on his elbows, his gaze distant. The wind tugged lightly at their clothes, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, like they were still 17, untouched by the weight of adult life. Noah turned to look at him, wanting to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he watched the shadows play across Derek's face and wondered if he was thinking the same thing. Back at the house, as Noah stepped inside alone, he lingered by the window, watching Derek disappear down the street. His heart beat too quickly for a simple goodbye. Later that night, as he lay in bed, the ceiling above him became a canvas of questions. He thought of Derek's hand, the way it had rested casually close to his own during their walk, the way their arms brushed without either pulling away. He remembered the warmth of his voice, the ease of their laughter, and the strange ache that followed every goodbye. Was it just nostalgia? Was he projecting something that didn't exist? He tried to dismiss it, told himself it was foolish, that too much time had passed, that whatever had existed between them had been a product of youth and proximity. But it was no use. The truth pressed against his chest like a tide, refusing to recede. The following afternoon, Derek showed up again, this time with 2 melting popsicles and a story about how he got lost hiking alone the day before. Noah laughed more than he had in weeks. They ended up sprawled out on the porch, the sun warm on their skin, shoulders occasionally bumping in that casual way that felt anything but casual. They didn't speak about the past. They didn't mention the tension. But it was there, in every unspoken glance, every comfortable silence that wasn't quite comfortable anymore. And as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows over the porch, Noah found himself wishing the moment would stretch on indefinitely. Not because it was perfect, but because it was safe. Unresolved, but safe. At night, alone again, he found himself playing back every detail. Derek's laugh, the way his shirt clung to his back in the heat, the way his voice softened when he talked about his family. Noah had spent so many years trying to forget that summer long ago, trying to rationalize what he had felt and why he had never said anything. And now, here they were again, older but still dancing around the same edges. The truth was simple, even if everything else wasn't. He was falling for someone he'd never really stopped loving. And whether or not Derek felt the same, Noah wasn't sure how much longer he could pretend nothing was happening. There was space between them, yes, but it wasn't distance. It was potential. It was something waiting. And the question lingering in Noah's chest as he drifted asleep was not whether they had changed, but whether they were finally ready to say what they had left unsaid all those years ago. The sky that evening looked like it had been painted in brushstrokes of deep violet and ember. The air was still warm from the day's sun, but the breeze had cooled just enough to carry a sense of calm. The waves below whispered in a steady rhythm, crashing gently against the rocky shore. Noah sat on the weathered bench overlooking the ocean, his arms resting loosely on his knees, his gaze fixed far beyond the horizon. Derek sat beside him, close enough that Noah could feel the heat of his body, but not so close that they touched. The silence between them had become a familiar thing, no longer awkward, but heavy with all the things neither of them knew how to say. For a while, they listened to the water and let the quiet stretch. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't planned this night. Derek had shown up just before sunset, asking if Noah wanted to walk down to the overlook. There had been something in his voice, a softness, maybe a vulnerability, that made Noah agree without hesitation. Now, sitting there beneath the fading sky, Noah felt as if the whole world had slowed down for them, as if something inevitable was drawing near. He stole a glance at Derek, who sat still, his eyes tracing the movement of the waves. The light caught his profile in a way that made Noah's chest tighten, a silhouette carved out of memory and longing. There had always been something about Derek that drew him in, not just the way he looked or laughed, but the way he made everything feel less complicated, even when it wasn't. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at their clothes, stirring something invisible between them. Noah felt his fingers twitch, aching to reach out, to bridge the space between them. But he didn't. He couldn't. Instead, he looked down at his hands, folded tightly in his lap. A quiet moment passed, then another. And then, finally, Derek spoke. His voice was low, quiet, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. What he said wasn't dramatic, wasn't rehearsed. It was honest, and it changed everything. Noah didn't answer at first. The words hung in the air between them like a fragile thread, and all he could do was breathe through the sudden weight in his chest. He felt exposed, like someone had opened a part of him he had kept locked away for too long. The ache wasn't unfamiliar. He had carried for years, but now it had shape, sound, presence. He turned to face Derek slowly. Their eyes met, and in that glance, all the things they hadn't said for so long came rushing back. The summer they lost, the silence that followed, the closeness that had never truly faded. It had always been there, lingering beneath everything else, waiting for this moment. Neither moved. The air felt thick with electricity, not loud or sudden, but slow building, charged. The kind that came just before a storm. Noah could feel his heartbeat in his throat, feel the tension coil tighter with every second that passed. And still, neither of them looked away. It wasn't about what had been said. It was about what had been felt, what had always been felt. Eventually, Derek looked away, his gaze drifting back toward the ocean. The spell broke gently, like a tide pulling back. But it didn't disappear. The energy remained, humming quietly between them. They walked back in silence, footsteps soft against the path. When they reached the porch, Derek lingered at the edge of the steps. Noah stood in the doorway, unsure whether to invite him in or let him go. But Derek simply nodded, the smallest smile playing on his lips, then turned and disappeared into the night. Noah watched him leave until the darkness swallowed his silhouette. And when he finally closed the door behind him, he felt changed. Not because anything physical had happened, but because something had been acknowledged, something real, something long buried. That night, as Noah lay in bed, he didn't sleep. He replayed every moment. The quiet glances, the unspoken words, the way Derek's voice had trembled slightly when he finally spoke. It was the kind of moment that didn't need to be loud to be unforgettable. It was the kind that lived beneath the skin, that stayed long after the noise of the world returned. And as he stared at the ceiling, heart heavy and full at once, Noah knew something had shifted between them. Something irreversible. Something that had always been waiting to surface. And now it had. The following morning felt different, even before Noah opened his eyes. The stillness in the house had changed somehow. The quiet was heavier, and the familiar creaks of the old wooden floors sounded more distant. Light filtered in through the thin curtains, painting soft lines across the ceiling. Yet, none of it brought comfort. He sat at the table with a half-empty cup of coffee, the bitter taste forgotten as his thoughts drifted. The night before played over and over in his mind. The ocean, the silence, the things Derek had finally said, and the way he had listened without answering. Not because he didn't feel the same, but because the weight of those feelings was too much to hold in one moment. He had waited years for that kind of honesty, and now that it had come, he felt paralyzed by it. Later that day, he wandered down the shore, the sand cool beneath his feet, the wind stronger than usual. Each wave that broke seemed to echo something inside him, a rhythm of longing and hesitation. He walked for what felt like hours, letting the motion clear his head or at least soften the noise within it. By the time he returned to the house, Derek was already waiting on the porch. There was no smile, no attempt to act like nothing had changed. Just quiet acknowledgement, an understanding between them that they were no longer circling around the truth. They were in it now, knee-deep and raw. They sat side by side, not touching, barely looking at each other. The air between them was dense, filled with everything they hadn't said, not just last night, but for years. The fear, the confusion, the moments of closeness that neither dared name at the time. Finally, Derek broke the silence. His voice was quiet, almost hoarse, and each word felt carefully chosen, like he was stepping barefoot across glass. Noah listened, every muscle in his body taut. Not because he was surprised, but because hearing it aloud made it real. And real was terrifying. When it was his turn to speak, the words came slowly, haltingly. He admitted the things he had buried, the glances, the thoughts, the ache that had followed him into adulthood. The guilt, the shame, the longing. He told Derek how he had tried to forget, how he convinced himself that it had all been in his head, that what they had back then was just youth and confusion. But it hadn't been. It had been real, and it still was. Neither of them cried. Neither reached out. They just sat with the truth between them, letting it breathe for the first time. And in that honesty, something shifted, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but like a knot loosening in the chest, a quiet release of something that had been held too tightly for too long. They stayed there as the sun dipped lower, their shadows stretching across the porch. Words had finally filled the silence, but now they needed space to settle. They didn't speak again that evening. Derek left before nightfall, with a nod that felt more like a promise than a goodbye. That night, Noah couldn't sleep, not because of anxiety, but because his mind was wide open, finally free of the weight of pretending. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting his thoughts drift without resistance. He wasn't sure what came next. There was no map for this, no plan. Only the truth, finally spoken, and the strange calm that came with it. Whatever happened now, it would begin from this place, not of fear, but of clarity. And for the first time in years, Noah didn't feel alone in what he carried. Derek had been there too, all along, carrying the same unspoken truth in silence. Now, they were carrying it together. The town began to empty as August crept toward its final days. Tourists disappeared, the shoreline grew quieter, and the air carried the first subtle chill of an approaching fall. The rhythm of the place slowed, and with it, Noah felt something inside him settle. Not into certainty, but into acceptance. Derek had been by a few times since that night on the porch. Their conversations were different now, lighter on the surface, but deeper underneath. They didn't revisit the things they had admitted, not directly, but it was there in the way they looked at each other, in the quiet ease of being near without hiding anymore. The silence had changed. It no longer felt like avoidance. It felt like understanding. They moved through the days with more intention. Shared small tasks, cleaning out the old shed, fixing a loose railing, cooking together without speaking much. Every action felt charged, but not volatile. There was no need to name what had happened. The air between them held it all. On the last evening before Derek was set to leave for his job back in the city, they walked along the beach, the sky stretched in layers of gold and silver. The water glowed, and the horizon seemed endless. Neither said anything for a long time. Eventually, they stopped near the old driftwood log where they used to sit as teenagers. The same spot where, years ago, their hands had almost touched and didn't. The place where something unspoken had taken root and never really died. Noah stood there, breathing in the salt air, listening to the waves break and pull back. He felt Derek shift beside him, close but not pressing. That had always been Derek's way, letting Noah choose the space, the closeness, the risk. He thought of everything they could have been if they hadn't waited so long. But regret didn't feel right anymore. What they had now wasn't perfect, wasn't certain, but it was honest. And that was more than they'd ever had before. When they returned to the house, Derek lingered at the doorway. The light in the living room was soft. The familiar creak of the floorboards followed them like memory. Derek looked at Noah, his expression calm, eyes searching. No words were spoken. There was no final confession, no last attempt to define what they were. Only a quiet moment where both knew they were leaving something open, not ending it, not quite beginning it, just allowing it to exist without pressure. Derek left the next morning. Noah watched from the porch as his car disappeared down the narrow road. He felt a familiar ache, but it was different now. It didn't sting. It didn't hollow him out. It was full, heavy with meaning, with memory, with something real that no longer needed to be hidden. The days that followed were quiet. Noah returned to his writing, sat by the window with coffee, walked the beach alone. But everything had changed. The silence in the house no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like reflection. Weeks passed. One afternoon, as the first leaves began to fall, Noah's phone buzzed. The message was simple. A name on the screen. A handful of words. Let's not wait another 5 years to be honest again. He stared at the message, smiling slowly. There was no plan, no promise. Just an invitation. And that was enough. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or declarations. Sometimes it unfolds in silence, in steady glances, in truths that take years to find the courage to speak. And sometimes love begins in the spaces between.